Nancy Guthrie's mysterious disappearance has become one of the most unsettling cases in recent memory. In this video, we will walk through the timeline of the case, the strange 41 minutes inside her home, the ransom messages sent to media outlets, and the disturbing questions investigators are still trying to answer. The story begins in the quiet Catalina foothills near Tucson, Arizona, where 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home under circumstances that investigators say clearly point to a crime. Nancy Guthrie was not a public figure herself, but she is the mother of well-known television journalist Savannah Guthrie. Nancy lived a relatively quiet life, and neighbors described the area as peaceful and safe. That is why what happened inside her home during the early hours of that night has shocked both the community and the public following the story. The timeline begins at 9:48 p.m. when Nancy's garage door opens. 2 minutes later, it closes again. According to available information, Nancy had returned home just like she had done many nights before. There was nothing unusual about the evening, no reports of suspicious activity, and no indication that anything was wrong. For the next 4 hours, everything appears normal. Then something changes at exactly 1:47 a.m. At that moment, Nancy's doorbell camera suddenly disconnects. Investigators say this was not caused by a glitch or a weak internet signal. The camera was deliberately disabled. That moment marks the beginning of what investigators now call the most important window in the entire case, a 41-minute period when someone was inside Nancy Guthrie's home. From 1:47 a.m. until 2:28 a.m., something happened inside that house that investigators still cannot fully explain. Kidnappings are usually fast. Criminals typically enter, grab their target, and leave as quickly as possible. They do not spend long periods moving through a home because every additional minute increases the risk of being caught. But in this case, whoever entered Nancy Guthrie's home stayed inside for 41 minutes. Motion sensors inside the house later recorded activity near the front entrance around 2:12 a.m., suggesting someone was still moving through the house well after the cameras had been disabled. At the same time, investigators discovered that the security monitoring system had been manually turned off. Cameras were installed around the property, but they were effectively useless because the cloud storage subscription had reportedly expired weeks earlier. The house had security equipment, but it had no memory. Then at 2:28 a.m., investigators noticed something subtle but extremely important. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker app disconnected from her phone. The pacemaker monitoring system only works when the phone is within about 30 feet. When the signal disappears, it strongly suggests the person wearing the pacemaker has moved away from the device. That means by 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie was no longer inside her home. She was gone. The next morning at 9:15 a.m., Nancy's caregiver arrived at the house and immediately noticed something unusual. The front door was unlocked. That was not normal behavior for Nancy. As the caregiver entered the home, it quickly became clear that something was wrong. Nancy was not there. Even more concerning, all of the items she would normally take with her were still inside the house. Her purse remained in its usual place. Her keys were still inside. Her phone had not been taken. Her Apple Watch was still charging on the nightstand in her bedroom. The medications she depended on for her heart condition were untouched in the bathroom cabinet. Investigators quickly concluded that Nancy had not left voluntarily. At 9:27 a.m., deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene, and the situation immediately raised serious concerns. There were pry marks on the front door and door frame, suggesting forced entry. Then investigators noticed something even more troubling. On the porch outside the house were small droplets of blood. Later testing confirmed the blood belonged to Nancy. It was not a large pool of blood, but enough to suggest that there had been some kind of struggle. Investigators explained that Nancy had very limited mobility and would not have been able to walk away on her own. The evidence at the scene strongly suggested that she had been taken from the house. Another strange detail added to the mystery. The doorbell camera was missing. It had not been smashed or damaged. It had been removed completely, as if whoever was inside the house did not simply want to avoid being recorded but wanted to take the device itself. Outside the home, investigators searched the gravel driveway for tire tracks. Unfortunately, rain had partially washed away most of the impressions, leaving only a rough estimate of the type of vehicle involved. Investigators believe it may have been a midsize SUV or van. However, nearby surveillance cameras provided another possible clue. Around 2:00 a.m., a light-colored van was seen at a convenience store about a mile and a half away from Nancy's home. Two individuals were inside the vehicle. They were dressed in dark clothing and had their faces covered. They purchased bottled water and snacks before leaving the store. No visible license plate could be seen on the vehicle. Later, private security cameras in the neighborhood captured what appears to be a similar van passing Nancy Guthrie's street around 1:30 a.m. before the cameras at her home went dark. Another recording appears to show a similar vehicle heading toward the interstate shortly after 2:40 a.m. That timeline suggests whoever was responsible for the crime was already in the area before the cameras were disabled and remained nearby even after Nancy had been taken. This level of preparation has deeply unsettled investigators. The central question remains the same. Why would someone spend 41 minutes inside the home of an elderly woman if the goal was simply kidnapping? Former investigators reviewing the case say that amount of time could indicate that someone was searching for something specific, documents, information, or an item inside the house. That theory leads to another troubling possibility. What if kidnapping Nancy Guthrie was never the original plan? What if someone entered the house for another reason and Nancy woke up during the process? If that happened, a confrontation could have followed, forcing the intruders to remove her from the home in order to avoid being identified. The case took another unexpected turn when the FBI became involved. On February 2nd, the investigation shifted from a missing person search to a full crime scene investigation. Search helicopters and large-scale ground searches were scaled back as investigators began focusing more heavily on forensic evidence and digital communication. Then something even stranger happened. The first ransom demand did not go to the family. Instead, it was sent to the entertainment news outlet TMZ. The email was structured, calm, and direct. It demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin. There was no greeting, no emotional language, and no room for negotiation. But two details in the message immediately caught investigators' attention. The sender mentioned that Nancy was not wearing her Apple Watch when she was taken and referenced a damaged floodlight outside the home. These details had never been made public. That strongly suggested the person sending the email either had direct knowledge of the crime scene or had been present during the abduction. Within hours, similar messages were sent to local Tucson news stations. However, the communication pattern was highly unusual. In most ransom cases, kidnappers contact the victim's family directly to begin negotiations and provide proof that the person is alive. In this case, the sender did the opposite. The message specifically stated that there would be no further communication and no negotiation. It felt less like an attempt to collect ransom money and more like a message designed to be seen by the public. The email also claimed that Nancy Guthrie was alive, aware of the situation, and frightened. So far, investigators have not been able to verify that claim. As the case gained national attention, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings appeared in a video message addressed directly to whoever had taken their mother. Speaking calmly but emotionally, Savannah asked for proof that Nancy was alive. She explained that in today's world, technology makes it possible to fake voices and videos using artificial intelligence. Because of that, the family asked for something that only Nancy herself would know, a private detail that could confirm she was truly alive. Meanwhile, the investigation began attracting intense public attention online. Hundreds of tips flooded into law enforcement agencies from across the country. Some people claimed to have seen suspicious vehicles while others tried to analyze the ransom messages themselves. Unfortunately, the growing attention also led to hoaxes. One man named Derek Keller was later arrested after sending fake ransom messages directly to the family. He attempted to mimic the tone of the original emails and demanded cryptocurrency payments. Investigators quickly determined he had no connection to the actual crime, but the hoax created additional confusion and distraction. As the days passed, investigators noticed another unusual detail. The deadlines mentioned in the ransom emails came and went without any escalation. There were no new demands, no proof of life, and no follow-up communication. In traditional ransom cases, kidnappers typically increase pressure if money is not delivered. In this case, the sender appeared strangely calm and detached. That has led investigators to consider another disturbing theory. What if the ransom narrative was created after the crime in order to explain Nancy Guthrie's disappearance? The more investigators examine the timeline, the more unusual details they find. 41 minutes inside the house. No valuables stolen. Security systems disabled. The doorbell camera removed. Messages sent to media outlets instead of the family. A refusal to negotiate. All of these elements suggest the crime may have been carefully staged. Law enforcement officials have been cautious with their public statements, but one phrase has been repeated in multiple briefings. This was targeted. The final and most chilling question investigators are now asking is whether Nancy Guthrie herself was the intended target or whether the crime was connected to her daughter's public profile. As the investigation continues, more than 300 leads have already been examined, hundreds of calls have been logged, and multiple agencies remain involved. Yet the case keeps returning to the same haunting question. What really happened during those 41 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's home?